Good Monday morning! Today's video is going to be about the importance of getting shit done as a developer. As a developer, you should care a lot about your craft, but you should care a little bit more about the end product that you're building. A viewer of Fun Function, Varenya, put it very succinctly: caring more about the artifact than the construct. There are two aspects to that we're going to talk about today. And the first one is, don't use quality as an excuse to procrastinate. However, on the flip side, don't use shipping as an excuse to do things that are wrong or sloppy. That is what we are going to talk about today. I am MPJ and you are watching Fun Function. This episode is part of a series on the top 8 developer habits chosen by you. You can find the full playlist here if you want to watch it from the beginning. I want to stress, and I mentioned this in the last episode, but it's important, so I want to stress it again, that this series, these top 8 habits, they are not a checklist. I asked people on Twitter to say what they thought were critical habits or traits for a programmer, like not a 10x programmer or senior or super programmer, just to function as a programmer. And these top 10 are the candidates. So this is an aggregate of what everybody said. There's no actual person saying that, oh, you should have these 8 habits to be like, in order to function as a programmer. That's not what it is. This is just like the top list of what people thought. I want this series to be about the basics. A lot of material out there is focused around finding these unicorn 10x programmers. How can you become 10 times more effective than like the average developer? And I think that worldview is just like, that's a really great way of becoming miserable to think like that. There are a lot of people out there, a lot of newspapers, a lot of blog articles and blah, people that not necessarily want, but either by accident or malice, paint the word average as a bad word. If you're average, then you're bad. You should be a top performer. That is such a horrible thing. Like, I think that way as well because I've been touted with this crap for many, many years. But it's just a horrible way to think, because if, say you're in a room with 100 people and you are average, that means that you are better than 50 of the people there. Getting to that point probably took years and years and years of work. And as the person that is ranked 50 in this room of developers or whatever, you can probably do a great deal of good things with your skill set. Being an average developer is fantastic. If you get to that level, you should be really proud of yourself because you worked really hard to get to that point and you can do a lot of good stuff. Don't compare yourself to others, especially not like some kind of weird ideal unicorn 10x developer that probably doesn't even exist. The only person that you should be comparing yourself to is your former self. That is the only person that you need to consistently beat. If you're beating your former self, you're doing good. Anyway, that's not at all what we were supposed to talk about. Sorry for digressing. So, why is it important to be focused on getting shit done? Well, at its essence, programming is not about coding, it is about helping people. So when we think about work, we need to remember that work is not some weird place we go to get money, because work is essentially servitude. And that's normally used in a negative sense. The definition, if I look it up, is the state of being a slave or completely subject to someone more powerful. And that sounds bad, but the way I view it, it is about putting somebody on a pedestal. For me, it is, I serve you. You are my audience. I've put you on a pedestal and I am now your servant. You could view it in a negative sense, in like that I am a slave to you, because I do have to put these things up every week. Whenever I miss a video, actually my viewership plummets and I have these red arrows in YouTube analytics for weeks and weeks. But you could also view it very positively in the sense that I am here and I have this big audience that listens to me, which allows me to, if I think things through and broadcast something that can be valuable to the people watching, I can do a very, very big amount of good. Perhaps you don't like the word servitude, but call it what you want, but I'm referring to providing another person with something that they need. And this is fundamental to living in a society. My favorite song by Bob Dylan is Gotta Serve Somebody. And I listen to that from time to time to remind myself when I get caught up in my own needs and wants a little bit too much. I'm focusing a little bit too much on myself. To remember that if I focus on the needs of others, that will fill a great need in me. Because as a human being, you feel good if you help your fellow human. It's just how we are wired. We're pack animals. But it's still easy to forget it. And if we forget it at the times we do, we're lost. This is not just in the workplace, it's everywhere. Like if you're a friend and you start, instead of focusing on being a good friend, you start focusing on what your friends should be doing for you, then you kind of stop being a good friend. And when you're an employee in many workplaces, I've fallen into the trap of starting to feel like a victim is often a bad place I've gone to in many workplaces. Instead of remembering that I was hired there to do a job and fundamentally also to improve the lives of the customers that use the product of the company. Or I could reframe myself and focus on being a good coworker and helping my fellow employees, my colleagues, to grow. Or I could focus on making my boss look good, like making them feel better about themselves or making their jobs easier. And on the flip side, as a manager, if you start to forget that you get frustrated with because your subordinates are not giving to you what you need, like they are not doing their job, you start forgetting that you are the manager, you're there to support them. You are there to make their jobs easier and facilitate that the team works. Then you start losing your way. And this doesn't just happen to individuals, it happens to businesses as well. Sometimes a business forgets that it came from a position where it's successful, it's a working business because it at one point provided customers with something that they needed. But sometimes a company loses its way and starts just focusing on the business instead. Like, oh, we need to survive as a business, we need to make money as a business, we need to grow, we need to survive, we need to, oh my god, these customers are doing the wrong things, they're pirating things, and oh my god, we need to sue these customers so that they know their place. Oh my god, this new competitor, it's providing this new service that is much better than our service. We need to find a way to subvert them. And if that happens, you as a business, if you lose sight of your core, your servitude, like everything else will just crumble because everything is based on that. I think you can even extrapolate this to governments. You can see when a government stops being focused on the needs of their citizens primarily and starts focusing on that the government needs to be strong in itself and the government needs to survive, then everything just turns to shit. It becomes horrible to be a citizen and it becomes poisonous to be in the government. It's very important to come back to servitude, I think. Programming, it's not about coding, it's about helping people. But that's why it's important to get shit done. But what do I mean specifically with getting shit done? It's kind of vague. So, like Varenya said, it's about caring more about the artifact than the construct. And in practice, I think that there are two components to that. And the first one is, don't use quality as an excuse to procrastinate. Procrastination for programmers can come in many forms. I think that there's even an episode about that there in somewhere. It could be writing an elaborate framework or a library. It could be restructuring in some interesting way. You start doing this if you're into object-oriented programming. It's a warning sign if you see an abstract factory in there somewhere, for instance. If you are into functional programming, you can do this as well, but then you start going into pro-functor optics and stuff like that. Many languages have elaborate static type systems, and that is also, like, overusing them is also a fantastic way of procrastinating. Thinking about types and how to structure types and how to inherit or compose them, and thinking about how they're named. Type systems are particularly dangerous for me. I can spend like a day thinking about the name of one thing. I'm not saying that all framework writing or type thinking is procrastination, but I'm saying that you can use them to do activities that feel like work. They feel like work. But you're not actually making any progress towards the end product. You're not actually making the life directly better for the end user. You're not actually fixing bugs, you're not actually making the software faster, you're not actually adding any features. But it feels like you're working. It's kind of empty productivity calories. But why do we do that? Why does that occur? Why do we procrastinate? My theory is that we procrastinate, it's a tricky word to say. We procrastinate because we don't want to do something. We have a task at work and we just don't want to do it. So you just reach for, I could just write a library instead, or I just start renaming things. You start. So why don't we want to do them? Well, I think it's mostly because we don't agree with something. We feel like, I'm tasked to do this thing, but I don't really feel that it is the best use of my time. And usually when you feel like that, it's because you really don't understand why somebody would want you to do this. Why do they think that this is the most important thing that you could do? Why does people up the chain of command or whatever, why is it that how can they think this is important? But if you think about it, do you actually think that the people that tasked you with this are dumb or sinister or lazy? Maybe they are, but it's more likely that they have tried to do their best with the information that they had and from the position that they're in and the things that they are trying to do. So if you're feeling unmotivated, the first thing that you should be doing is asking why and trying to understand, why am I doing this task? Maybe going to your boss and, can you please explain the reasons for this to me? Like, why are we doing this? I'm more interested in the holistic perspective behind this and your realities so that I can do a better job. And if you're lucky, that person can give you a good description of what things are, and that will give you a better sense of connectedness and make you feel better about the task. And sometimes it might actually challenge that person I haven't really thought about that. Perhaps and hopefully that person can go and then ask the person that gave them the task and hash out the unclarity of things. And that might result in the team getting a much better understanding about how their work fits into the entire picture. Or maybe that doesn't work. Maybe the person says that, what, you should not question these things, you should just go do it. And then you have to go back to your desk and think about, why am I still doing this if I don't understand? Why am I still doing this if I can just go somewhere else and work somewhere else? And then you maybe that results in you making a call to a recruiter and applying for another job. And then you ask yourself, why am I still at work? Well, I need to get money in before I find my new job. Or maybe you can't do that because you're in a place where you don't have that kind of, you're not that attractive on the job market. So then you think about, why am I doing this? Well, I'm doing it to improve my skills and save money for some online courses so that I can improve and so that I can get a better job than this. When you're feeling unmotivated and you start that word is so hard. Procrastinating. When you start doing the P word, then ask yourself why until you are motivated. I did an episode on the whole asking why thing. It's called Mission Clarity. You should check that out if you're into that. We're also going to explore that a bit more later in the series because one of the habits is understanding context, which is basically that. The second part, and this flip side of this thing, is don't use shipping as an excuse to do things that are wrong or sloppy. So the first part there, building the wrong thing. Let's talk about that. What do I mean by that? I'm talking about actually what we talked about earlier, where you're tasked with something, you're pressured to do something, it's on the board and there's a deadline for it. Something that is just wrong. I remember one project that I had at a workplace where we were supposed to do this thing that I cannot name, but it was, we had a product that was supposed to behave in a certain way. And it was not a bad idea per se. When I first heard about it, it sounded like a good idea. But as we started working with it, we discovered two things. First of all, users didn't really like it. Anyone, we nor real users, when we started showing it to users, they just didn't like it. It just didn't make sense. So it made sense on an idea level, but when in practice you just started seeing the flaws with it. And secondly, it was horribly expensive to build. It was just so technically complicated to get it to mesh with the existing system. It was not one of those things where you had to do a little hack. It was like you had to do this ludicrously complicated thing that would take months and months and months, even though it was one of the things that from the exterior, we're just gonna add this flag. Users didn't like it and it was really expensive. And as a team discovered this, we went back up in the organization and we tried asking why are we doing this? This is not good for these reasons. And because of how the organization worked at the time, we were not really able to get this up the chain. It was just the thing just stuck in the organization. It's still to this day hard for me to verbalize how this worked. The organization doesn't work like that anymore, much due to the learnings of this project and how badly it went. But the point is that our organization built the wrong thing. We were good employees, we shipped it, but it was the wrong thing. And I regret to this day that we didn't put more pressure back up in order to prevent this mistake from being done. And this resulted in really bad things. First of all, it made the team feel powerless. And we also lost our sense of purpose because now suddenly we didn't think that what we were doing was well connected to what we were trying to achieve. So we couldn't feel a purpose because we didn't believe in the thing that we were doing was genuinely connected to what we were trying to achieve. So we lost our sense of connectedness. And we know from research in self-determination theory that you often hear me talking about, that connectedness is extremely important for energy and motivation. A team that doesn't feel connected will just perform horribly because they are feeling very bad and have low energy. So how do you prevent this? Well, it comes back to the fact that you need to ask why, but you need to push the envelope on keeping your managers accountable and also yourself accountable, that you don't just accept things that are said, you also need to spend time to understand them. In the story that I talked about before, we actually failed in this. I don't know if we could have succeeded if we pushed harder and were more firm in our belief that this was the wrong thing to do, or if it was just impossible to do that. But in the end, we had a post-mortem on this, and we talked about this. Like, this project did not fare well because of these reasons, and this is how we should do it better next time. So even if you don't succeed in asking why the first time, perhaps you can then use that failure as a way to drive the why asking and the search of why and the search of understanding and mission clarity. Again, you should watch that episode. So what were we talking about? Don't use shipping as an excuse to do things that are wrong or sloppy. Let's talk about being sloppy. What do I mean when I say being sloppy? More specifically, I am referring to taking on irresponsible amounts of tech debt. Alright, so tech debt. I talked about tech debt before in this episode. Might want to check that out if you're interested in the subject. So tech debt, some tech debt is fine to have. Like, in order to ship, you have to sometimes do some hacks in order to get things out the door, and you can fix those hacks next week. That's fine. The distinction is taking on irresponsible amounts of tech debt. For instance, a hack that you make to ship something, it might be like you save an hour now because your ship time is, you need to ship, it's Friday and we're at the end of our deadline. So we need to cut corners. That is a hack, so it will cost you more time the line. It's tech debt, so you're probably gonna have to spend 2 hours next week to clean it up. But that's fine, because next week you have allocated time to clean things up. And you do it, you're disciplined, you have that. However, an irresponsible behavior would be to, if you're in the same situation, you figure out that, oh, I can do this shortcut. It will save me an hour of work, but it will probably take 10 hours to clean up because it's very messy. And also, next week we don't really have time to clean anything up. So next week it's probably going to be deferred, perhaps next week, but then I'm on vacation, so then somebody else will have to clean that up. But they won't in practice, so they will start, because they're pressured with some other thing, and they start building things on top of your hack. So there's a hack on top of the hack. So then you have this thing of exploding complexity that eventually turns into this thing that would take hundreds of hours to untangle. And that is clearly irresponsible, but the